So very recently, United States President Joe Biden made the news, as he usually does these days in an election year. This time involving his relationship with the country of Japan, where I call home. And as an expat American living here in Japan, it's a very important news to me. Basically, if you read the headlines of these reports, uh, Joe Biden was noted as calling Japan a xenophobic country, along with other countries such as traditional rivals China and Russia, and other friendly countries to the U.S. in theory, India. So, what? Why would Joe Biden call Japan xenophobic? And really, I think the true question here is, especially if you don't know Japan, is Japan really a xenophobic country? So let's go look at what he actually said. We're on the Japan news website here. They're pulling from the AP Associated Press article. You see here, President Joe Biden has called Japan and India xenophobic countries that do not welcome immigrants, lumping them with two adversaries, China and Russia. So if we look further down into the article, let's look at what he actually said. We highlighted here. So at a hotel fundraiser where the donor audience was largely Asian American, Biden was speaking, I believe, on Wednesday, May 1st at a fundraiser event. Biden said the upcoming U.S. election was about freedom, America, and democracy, and the nation's economy was thriving because of you and many others. And going on, he said, why? Because we welcome immigrants, Biden said. Look, think about it. Why is China stalling so badly economically? Why is Japan having trouble? Why is Russia? Why is India? Because they're xenophobic. They don't want immigrants. The president added that immigrants are what makes us strong, the United States. Not a joke. That's not hyperbole. Because we have an influx of workers who want to be here and want to contribute. So if you just looked at the headline of many articles relating to this speech he gave, basically said Biden calls Japan xenophobic, and India, friendly countries in theory to the United States. So really, the question then is, do you think that, or do I think that? I mean, what was my opinion of this question? Really, is Japan a xenophobic country? So I'm thinking here that he was trying to frame it more as a pro-immigration message. I think he wanted to frame himself, especially for the audience, for the upcoming election, that he's for the immigrants. He thinks immigrants bring a lot to the United States, and he wanted to make a comparison with some traditionally less friendly to immigrant destinations, such as China, Russia, Japan, India, in his mind. And he felt that their lack of welcoming of immigrants made those countries suffer economically. But, I mean, if you look at the word xenophobic, the definition of it, it's defined as a dislike of prejudice, or it's defined as a dislike or prejudice against those from other countries, foreigners, basically, to your home country. So it's not necessarily about immigration. It's just, in a sense, kind of a racism. Like, you don't, basically, anyone who's not from your country, you have a dislike or a prejudice towards. So, I mean, calling Japan xenophobic was an easy way for a lot of media outlets and sites to get clicks. It's it's a hot topic. A U.S. president. It's not just some random person. It's the U.S. president calling one of his allies a xenophobic country. If you read a little bit closer, I think it's more about he's just trying to make a point about immigration. But xenophobic, of course, is a very damaging word. It's not something you just throw around lightly, especially if you're the leader of a major world power. So I wanted to look into some of the immigration data about this. Do I really think Japan is a xenophobe? Can you call Japan xenophobic? And there's a lot of information or stuff about Japan's history and culture up to now, especially its isolationist period earlier in Japan's history, which we won't go into too much. But I want to look at Japan these days. Is it becoming, can you really define it as a xenophobic country? So, looking at some articles I pulled up for this video, this one's from the Japan Times in October of 2023, just giving the stats on the number of foreign residents in Japan. It rises, so it's going up. It's not going down for, in theory, a xenophobic country. It's going up to a record 3.2 million in 2023. So it's up about 148,000 from the end of December 2022. So it is going up. The numbers are going up in terms of immigration. That's in the midst of a whole depopulation as a whole of Japan. So there are more immigrants coming in to the country over time. If you want to look into some more detailed information, there's some good commentaries. I found a few I want to mention here. Again, from the Japan Times. Japan is bringing in more foreign nationals than you think. This is from Geroyd Rady from August of 2023. So again, talking about the illustration. So it's again making headlines of all 47 pictures in Japan's. The numbers were beginning to decline, even in Okinawa, which has the country's highest birth rate. So overall, again, the nation is losing population, but the immigrant population, the foreign population, is going up in Japan. So if you look at some of the data that he mentions in this article, the number of foreign nationals rose 11% from a year earlier, that's 2022, to comprise 2.4% of the total population, or just under 3 million people. As the figures are now from January 1, which is probably, now that's why you got the 3.2 in the earlier article, it's now higher than the 3 million. So maybe about 2.6, 2.7 of Japan's population is getting close to 3% of a foreigner element. And then it notes another thing. Based on population projections, conversation has already been shifting to a future where foreign residents will make up more than 10% of the people in the country 50 years from now, so about 2070, similar to the current levels of the US, UK, or France. So from if the levels of population, maybe depopulation continue, the immigration rate keeps going in the way it is, then Japan could be looking at a similar immigrant portion, foreigner portion to some of the other traditional immigrant-friendly countries, including the U.S., that Joe Biden is the president of. So, why is this trend, happening? There's a few reasons that, again, is mentioned in this article. The government of Japan treading a thin line between business complaint of labor shortages and a public that is already broadly cautious over large-scale immigration isn't exactly shouting about the rooftops. The government is kind of secretly making immigration a bit easier or more welcoming to foreign residents. So it goes into a bit detail of some of those initiatives here. Prime Minister Fumio Kishida has expanded a visa that allows foreign laborers and their families to stay in Japan indefinitely from just 2 industries to 11, so making it easier to stick around, including the extremely stretched service sector. And this is Kishida saying this: we have to consider a society where we coexist with foreigners. Very non-xenophobic statement, I would say, for sure. A long-standing foreign training program that was criticized for enabling abuse will be scrapped and replaced. For white-collar professionals, initiatives include a fast track to permanent residency for high earners. The government is also studying the introduction of a digital nomad visa to attract those who can live and work anywhere. Another goal is to attract 400,000 foreign students by 2033, from a little over of 300,000 before the pandemic, with half staying on for employment. Currently, around only 40% remain after their studies. So again, it's hard to call this xenophobic if there is active, but maybe subtle, small moves, but moves nonetheless towards increasing the foreign population. Hard to call that xenophobic, I would say. Another article that I want to quickly look at here from the Mainichi, Life in Japan, is this a country on the cusp of a demographic revolution, by David McNeil. Again, mentioning some of the similar numbers from the last article. The foreigners topping over 3 million in 2022, up from 11% from the year before. And not many coming from Caucasian countries like the island of UK. A lot of that immigration coming from China, Vietnam, South Korea, and other Asian countries coming to Japan. Also, good to mention here, last year Japan gave just over 200 foreigners refugee status and allowed another 1760 to stay on humanitarian grounds. So it's not a lot if you think about it compared to some other countries, but it is the highest on record since Japan put a system in place for accepting refugees in 1982. So again, slow, but some movements towards becoming a bit more foreigner friendly, or at least taking in more foreigners. Another notable trend is that more non-Japanese, like the author, are staying longer. Nearly 42% of those who came to Japan in 2016 have lived for 3 years or more. But again, he notes here, during all of the years that the author has been there, it's hovered between 1 and 3% of the total population. That's foreigners in Japan. 1 and 3% of the population is foreigners. Far behind most other advanced countries, but again, by 2070, over 1 in 10 of Japan's population could be foreign nationals, estimates the Labor Ministry. So, again, we could be looking at the beginning of a very long, very slow, but a gradual increase in the foreigner population. Again, hard to look at it for a xenophobic country per se. So, what about your everyday Japanese? There's small moves by the government. I would say your usual short-stay tourist, your limited time traveler is not going to encounter a lot of xenophobic attitudes, aside from maybe the occasional story of a Japan only sign, which in some cases actually means Japanese language rather than Japanese nationality only. The owners might not feel comfortable speaking in non-Japanese, which I think are also definitely a minority issue compared to a lot of businesses in Japan. Or maybe you'll get checked for your ID by the police on the street. Kind of possible. Yeah, let's call it maybe racial profiling because you look foreign. But in theory, it's a way for police to find illegal immigrants or maybe those overstaying their visa. So there's a reason. It might not be the best reason, but there is a reason for some of the madness that comes with that. But again, that doesn't happen to I think only a few tourists while they're here. But when you're living in Japan as a foreign resident like myself long term, there are some unique hurdles you might have to face. The main one is getting over what Japanese people think foreigners are or should be. So outside of your big cities like Tokyo, Osaka, or your tourist destinations where you interact with a lot of foreigners, it's less likely for someone in the country, for example, to have a chance to meet or interact with a foreigner. So these people's impressions where you don't interact with foreigners on a day-to-day basis face-to-face in real life, it's informed by sources such as news, television, movies, leading to possibly stereotypical views of what a foreigner is. For example, Japanese news will report every now and then about foreigners doing bad things in Japan, be it like theft or, attacks, assault, whatever. And if you hear enough of stories about foreigners doing bad things in Japan and you don't have any other positive stories about or regular foreigner volunteering at a soup kitchen or paying their taxes on time or just being a good citizen, you're going to think foreigners just bring a bad element to the country over time. So looking back at some of the articles, they even discussed a little bit about this attitudes of Japanese towards foreigners. So, surveys suggest that ordinary Japanese are softening attitudes on immigration because it would diversify and revitalize the country, but only so much. In a survey on internationalization among 3,880 Japanese residents for the 2020 book Imin to Nihon Shakai, Immigrants and the Japanese Society, for example, Kikuko Nagayoshi of the University of Tokyo notes that here's a number, 60% said that a rise in the number of immigrants would lead to a spike in crime rates and jeopardize security and order. That's over the majority who think that more immigrants equals more crime and less security and order. If you go to the first article from the Japan Times that we mentioned earlier, the first commentary article. So some 70% of those asked by public broadcaster NHK in 2020 agree with the need to bring in more foreign workers, though that number drops to 57% when asked if they wanted that increase to be in the area. So go ahead and bring the foreigners, just not in my backyard, for example. But a more positive note here, an expansive Pew Research Center survey in 2019 found that Japan to be no international outlier on perceptions of migrants, with the same percentage, 59%, agreeing with the proposition that immigrants make our country stronger as in the U.S. So again, not very different from the U.S. in that respect, but there is, as you can see, around half to maybe a little bit over the majority where some people think that, foreigners are possibly bringing in trouble. Let's keep an eye on them. So you also have to note that there are definitely overtly xenophobic groups in Japan. Again, I would love to say that they're the minority for sure, a small minority, but they are definitely a noisy minority. If we look, again, just one more article I want to show you really quickly here. This is from the Asahi Shimbun. This is from 2021, so it's a bit older. But Musashino City, part of Tokyo, they basically had a referendum where they were going to allow foreign nationals, including short-term residents, to vote in local referendums. It was proposed from the city, and it was voted down. 14 members of the assembly voted against it, while 11 were in favor. Some critics said the required period of stay in the city was far too short for the right to vote. The information of the proposal has not been effectively distributed to the public. The proposal only said here, for example, those eligible to vote in public referendums must be 18 years or older and listed in the city's basic resident registered network for at least 3 state months. So it is a short stay, But it does give foreigners the right to vote on, like, city issues, city referendums. But it was voted down by the assembly. But if you look further down in the article, xenophobic groups have also rallied in the city's downtown area and around City Hall using a propaganda vehicle to blare out their position. So blare, noisy, and they're around. They're not shy. They're trying to hide it, and they're basically saying, like, yes, we don't want foreigners. Don't give foreigners the vote, stuff like that. So there's a small element, and they do have a small influence when it comes to politics, because they're still the voting population. So let's not ignore the fact that there is some xenophobia. But really, as a long-term former resident myself, I had to disagree with what President Biden was saying. Taking the xenophobic word at face value, I would say 98% of my interactions with Japanese to be positive, and I'm not treated adversely for being from a foreign country in any prejudicial way, I feel. So, I mean, again, this doesn't dismiss the fact that xenophobic people, groups, places definitely do exist in Japan, and we had to be vigilant and call it when we see it. But I've found that to be the uncommon exception rather than the rule. I've been here for more than a decade, and I've been treated nicely for the most part. I hesitate, as Biden did, to label a whole country based on a few bad apples, or maybe a cultural history, or idea of what the country used to be, where it is making some small changes. Let's give credit where credit's due, and I don't want to outright label, with such an inflammatory word, xenophobic, anti-immigrant. There is small moves, but moves being made nonetheless to make Japan a more foreigner-friendly, foreigner-populated location. I also believe in the anti-immigration, meaning that Biden probably intended with his statement, is also incorrect. I mean, we saw the numbers are slowly but surely growing, and will continue to do so, especially as depopulation remains a problem in Japan. And for the Japanese government has introduced a lot of measures to try and increase the birth rate, subsidies, stipends, support, but it's not enough to address depopulation. Immigration is probably going to be the answer. That's my opinion. To increase the labor shortage and the population shortage and the depopulation in some of the rural communities as well. But it is up to Japanese businesses, organizations, schools, what have you, to make Japan a more attractive workplace, education place, when compared to other countries. If a person does not have, I believe, a specific interest in Japan culturally or for whatever, historically, it's much more likely they'll go to another country like the United States or Europe for work. Those countries are much more set up for it, I feel. They also have English being a much more, accessible language. Japanese is not the easiest language to learn, of course. And a lot of the smaller companies, smaller schools do not have the formal intake or the knowledge to take on a lot of foreigners at a time. So we need to also increase the knowledge with our smaller, mid-sized businesses, schools, groups, to be able to take in more foreigners and support them, and not just leave them hanging out to dry when they come into the country. So I think, really, Biden probably intended the phrase, calling Japan xenophobic, to rile up some supporters, get his base excited. It's an easy way to get support, especially in an election year, at the expense of a non-voting foreign element. Let's call, the Japanese residents are not going to vote in the U.S. election. Let's call them xenophobic. Easy points in theory. But it's an incorrect one in my opinion. And we got to be careful when we throw out words like xenophobia. Because if your average American saw that the president was saying Japan is a xenophobic country, they might just go with it and not read between the lines or do the deep dig. And I would hate for that to be the case when there's really a great country to be found and learn about if you come and visit. So that's my little spiel about what Biden was saying. I feel like I need to speak out a little bit, get at least my 2 cents for whatever it's worth on the internet here on YouTube. So if you disagree or agree or hear anything that you want to discuss about it, feel free to leave some nice comments and we can discuss further. But otherwise, hopefully in the next couple videos, when I get back to it, will be more about coming to Japan, tourism, visiting, having a great time. So if you're interested in that and learning more about having the most of your time in Japan, feel free to leave a subscription. And yeah, thanks for watching. See you later.